It's time for Promoter 101, the podcast, hosted by Steiny.
Welcome to the fourth episode of Promoter 101. I'm your host, Dan Steinberg.
And I'm Luke Pierce. Very stoked about today's podcast, Dan. A lot of great things to break down. We're going to be joined later by Stuart Ross. We'll be talking to a few agents about how they sign acts, the research, and the pitch. But first, the news.
Congratulations to the Chicago Cubs and their Bruce Solar lookalike manager.
Big shout out to all Cubs fans out there. The host of this podcast, very much included. Cubs took the Indians to Game 7 in Cleveland, beating the Indians 8-7 in 10 innings at the end of the 108-year curse.
If you're Live Nation's head of country touring, Brian O'Connell, with the CMAs and the Cubbies in Game 7 of the World Series at the exact same time, where do you go?
Of course, he was at the game instead of being at the CMA Awards on Wednesday night right here in Nashville. Congrats are in order to all the winners of the 50th Annual Country Music Association Awards. Garth Brooks took down the Entertainment Year of the Award, and the evening honored the legendary Dolly Parton. There's going to be a lot of champagne popping going over the labels. Sales have been popping all over iTunes for country names. We've been seeing a lot of names like Little Big Town, Tim McGraw, Thomas Rhett, and Florida Georgia Line re-enter the top iTunes charts this week. So the second year in a row, we've seen a real move after the award show and iTunes sales. So you can bet you're going to see more people horse trading to get their artists in the program in 2017.
Jeff Chabon is reunited with his Phantasma buddy John Valentino as he joins the AEG Live Southeast team.
Want to give a shout out to Vivian Wang as she embarks on her new gig at AEG Live. Vivian left her role at Axis last week to move a few floors up in downtown LA as she starts her job as a promoter. Very excited for you, Vivian.
Live Nation announced it's taking a majority stake in Ashley Capp's AC Entertainment. Ashley will taking home a fat check for his role in producing some of the outstanding events as far as Bonnaroo, Big Ears, and shows at the Tennessee Theater, as well as all around the Heartland. Well done, Ashley. I hope you're buying drinks next week at Billboard.
R.I.P. to Norm Brokaw. He was an establishing force of the William Morris Agency and WME Chair Emeritus. For those of you who haven't read the book, The Mailroom, The Hollywood History from the Bottom Up, I highly recommend it. There's some incredible stories about Norman and the legacy left over the 7 decades in the entertainment business. R.I.P. Norman.
House of Blues' new location in Anaheim is set to open up in March of 2017. They're moving off of the Disney property. That should be a great club to be back in the scene.
That's it for the news.
This week, we want to take a look at how agents go about signing new acts, what their process is, and what's involved.
We've got some of the best agents in the business joining us today to explain what their process is. We're going to first welcome Mr. Steve Ferguson from the Agency for the Performing Arts, and then we're going to talk to Mr. Jim Lenz at TKO, the Kirby organization.
From APA, Steve Ferguson. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Donnie. Great to be here.
How do you go about signing an act? Is there a trick or some method you use?
Well, there's no hard and fast rule, really, how to sign an act. It's really kind of down to a lot of it is gut instinct. Do you see this group, this artist have a future?
Have you developed a playbook on how to lock down an act?
There's not really a criteria like step 1 through 5, and you got to tick all the boxes. Every act is different, every agent is different, and everybody has a different path.
Did you just know Ingrid Michaelson was gonna blow up?
Well, I mean, I loved her album from the minute I heard it, but I wanted to see her perform live. But it took me the third time to really say I'm in. But the first time I saw her was at the Knitting Factory here in New York City. But it was packed, and everybody knew every word. And I think the track was about a week old or less. And when she performed it, everybody in the crowd knew it and was singing along to it. And that's when I was like, wow, there's something going on here.
Have you ever signed anything without first seeing it live?
Sure. I mean, when you work with a lot of UK-based acts like I do, sometimes you don't have the luxury to go and see a band play live.
Thanks so much for joining us, Steve.
Yeah, you got it. Anytime.
Joining us today at Promoter 101, we've got agent Jim Lenz from TKO Artists.
Great. Thank you. Great to be here.
Jim, so you've got a lot of great classic rock acts under your belt, and you've worked with a lot of new upcoming acts, too. You must have a process for how you sign these guys. What's your go-to method?
Well, depending on the level and where a band is at in their career, it's all about identifying what their goals are.
So you want to get on the same team as the act and make sure that you're on message, almost like a politician.
Exactly. And you know what? As you mentioned, the same team, I look at it as the team, we're all brand partners.
Excellent. And what about when you're going after a younger, new artist? How do you make that happen?
As far as the research goes, I mean, to identify who we want to look at, a lot of times it starts from the buzz that's going in there. There's an industry buzz.
you talked about the research. What is your research for that?
If I hear from one promoter, hey, you might want to check this band out, or I see them out somewhere, I want to know where they've been playing.
Are you talking about fans? Are you talking about records? Are you talking about social media numbers? What do you mean by the numbers?
Okay, it's all combined. Social media numbers, there's the sheer number of followers who are the real fans. But get the analytics of the zip codes and where these folks are signing up. And does that translate to that's where they're playing or that's where they should be playing?
Okay, let's switch bases for a second. How do you make the approach?
I approach the band right out of the box to ask them what their goals are. What are they doing?
So do you have a golden move, Jim?
That's a good question. I can't say that I have a slick patent move to sign an act because everything is different.
Jim, thanks so much for taking the time and talking to us today on Promoter 101.
Thank you, Dan.
This week, we're joined for an interview with Stuart Ross. Stuart's an artist manager at Red Light, looking after the careers of Tom Waits and Puddle's Pity Party. He's got a background in tour accounting, having been nominated or awarded Tour Accountant or Road Manager of the Year several times by both Polestar and Performance magazines. Stuart joined Dan for an in-person interview at the Employment Presents office in Seattle, Washington, where the two sat down for a chat.
So, we're very excited. Promoter 101 has a great guest right in the office today, Stuart Ross.
All right.
Excited to have you here.
We're going to Promoter 201 today.
201, we're going to kick it up to that next level.
Next notch.
You've done it all. Tour accountant, road manager.
I've never been a performer.
That's got to be next, but I hear it's settlement you can put on quite a drama.
Yeah, we can get there.
And you booked the shows for Tom for years too.
Yep, for years. I was a licensed agent. I mean, in California, I went and got my license because you
have to there.
In California, you have to.
So where does it start? Take us back to Cleveland.
I was a roadie. I was a roadie for local bands and local blues bands. And, I moved around equipment for nothing or $5 a night. And out of high school, I went to work at the infamous Cleveland Agora.
The LeConte's room, Hank and Henry.
Yep, not the one that currently exists on East 55th.
Because it moved.
It moved. Well, it moved 3 times. But the one on 24th and Chester, the famous one that had the recording studio upstairs. And I was the house sound man.
You were sound man at the Agora.
Yeah, I worked at the Agora when the Agora was probably one of the most important clubs in the country, and certainly one of the most important clubs in the country outside of L.A. and New York.
Well, they had figured out the trick. The LeConte's knew that they weren't the A market, but they could get the off nights of the week, and they could fill their room that way, and then they put the local bands on the weekends.
Well, that's almost right. The real trick was they did Monday night concerts. So they got bands either going to New York or coming from New York, right? So they did Monday nights, and they had all major acts, but there was a 24-track recording studio above the stage. And the snake cable ran from the stage to the recording studio. And they recorded every show, 24-track, and then gave it to WMMS, which was the big rock station in Cleveland, it still is, who replayed the show on Wednesday. So not only did you walk away from the Agora with a 24-track master of your show,
which you owned as the band, right? They just gave that to the band.
I assume so. I wasn't involved in that part of it, but I assume they did. But they then played it on WMMS. And MMS in those days was a very powerful station. They broke Bowie. They helped break Springsteen, Lou Reed. I mean, it was, it was endless for MMS. And so everybody wanted to play the Agora. And there were insane shows. Patti Smith's first show outside of New York. Bob Marley and the Wailers, Springsteen, everybody played there. It was awesome.
So they were onto something.
They were onto something. Will never be recreated again, but we can say that about pretty much anything in the music industry.
It's a legendary room. I mean, before the House of Blues, that was the model for the ballroom.
Yep. It was the best.
Those guys did a great job of it. And they were in a tough market because you had the guys like Belkins right there competing with them.
That's right. Yeah. It was Cleveland. But, Belkins never did the club market.
So you go from Cleveland as a roadie to the sound guy.
Oddly, I grew up next door to the Belkins. And I don't mean relatively in the same neighborhood. I mean, our two houses were separated by a driveway. Mike and Jules.
Mike Sr.
Mike Sr. and Jules were the first adults I knew in my life other than my parents.
Talk about fate.
But it never made a difference to me in my career. They were probably 20 years older than me and were in the clothing business at the time.
Interesting.
So even though I knew them and our families were close, it made absolutely no difference.
So did you come up with Michael Jr. then?
No, we're kind of separated by, maybe 10 years between when I started in the business and he started in the business.
Dollar for dollar, I think he's got the best hair in the industry.
Huh. Yeah, probably.
So you go from working the board at the Agora. How do you wind up leaving town?
Well, there were bands who were coming through that were looking for guys to go out on the road with. And I picked up and went on the road with an English jazz rock group, Brian Auger's Oblivion Express.
I can honestly say I've never heard of that name.
I'm not surprised by your comment. But in the days of mid-'70s and jazz rock being big, Brian Auger, Herbie Hancock, they were selling out pretty decent-sized rooms.
Now, Herbie I know.
Right. Brian was in the British side
Okay.
of this. It's kind of like the British Herbie Hancock, played B3.
Okay, and would he still be known there for our listeners in the UK?
And he's still around.
Okay.
Anyway, I went out on the road, and in those days, you kind of did everything. You drove the truck, you set up the equipment, you and whoever you were working with did sound and lights and backline, and we just did it.
And trucks were more like box trucks, right? You're not talking about the semis.
We're talking about rider trucks.
Okay.
And the band would travel in a station wagon. And, it wasn't that quaint, but that's the way it worked. And I would pick up money every night just because, I don't know. They said, you, go pick up the money.
And everything was cash then, too, right? There wasn't a lot of trust for promoters back then.
That's true. But there wasn't enough cash that you were picking up $100,000. You're picking up $2,500. So I found that I actually had a better skill set at picking up money and checking bands into hotels than I did mixing sound. There were people with much better ears than me.
So you became the concierge for the band.
I became consigliere. I kind of morphed into a tour manager role without actually knowing what it was. But it was just skills that I seemed to have a better affinity to.
Something tells me you'd be a good wartime consigliere.
We can try that.
I don't want to be on the other side of you. So as that role gets invented for you of tour manager, as it becomes, the industry finds itself at this point, and those roles are just getting invented.
Right. So right around the mid-'80s, I started working for a band called Missing Persons.
Huge band in the 80s.
In the 80s, there was Lady Gaga in the 80s, right? Incredible musicians, all of whom were, offshoot from Frank Zappa's band.
Really?
Yeah.
So they could play. It wasn't just pop.
They really could play. Even the singer Dale Bozio sang on Frank Zappa records. And then I started learning about settlements. And for whatever reason, even though I'm a product of Cleveland public education and had absolutely no ability in math whatsoever, I kind of figured out what was going on with concert industry finances. And I started moving myself more towards a tour accounting role.
Interesting. So you're figuring out where the money is, and quite frankly, back then, a lot of the bands and management didn't really know or care where the money was. They were living in the success of it, and you were out there paying attention to where the dollars and cents of it all were.
Well, what's interesting about it is learning about the dynamics of the industry, learning about how the deals work and why they work the way they do.
So you were a student of the deal?
I was a student of the deal.
Because in the business within itself, it's one of the more fascinating business. If you're truly a fan of the business, the science of it, of how the math works and how the deal works and how the relationship of the trust works, it's a fascinating paradigm.
It's true. And you can look at it in a whole lot of different ways. And it could be leveling the playing field, or you could take it to a very negative point and say, these are just people cheating each other. And the fact is that the business morphed into something that was unsustainable. People were making deals that were just not right.
How so?
Whether it's deals that went from 70-30 to 90-10, and people being able to allow somebody else to make profit, and people counting other people's money, and really trying to be a referee in a very ethical sense between all those parties.
The level between greed and reality.
You know, it got very weird there for a while.
Well, it's an odd thing with the competitiveness of wanting to be involved with something is so cool as rock and roll. Somebody's always going to be willing to offer a better deal, which may not make sense. It could cost the fans a higher ticket price, which could actually hurt the turnout, or could put the show in the hands of somebody that's willing to pay more, that doesn't have the education on how to produce the show correctly.
Or is making a deal for the wrong reasons. If you're making a deal and it's really a profitless deal, then it probably shouldn't have been made in the first place. Because on one hand, I feel bad for promoters. Did I just say that on a mic?
That's going to be the promo clip for this whole feature.
Let's start that one over.
No, I think that's a keeper. I think there's about 700 people that listen just immediately became their favorite person.
All right, so I'm going to have to spin it some other way. Who should not be asked to work on a 10 or 15% profit margin.
Well, and it's fine if the show is a guaranteed sellout.
Right.
I mean, it started in the early days with the bigger shows, the Led Zeppelins or into the Eagle deals, and Irving's famous for having these tight deals. And if your shows are selling out and you're grossing these multiples, it's fine because there's still enough money at the end of the day. It's when the show doesn't sell or doesn't get there that it then changes the whole position of everything.
Okay, so you have a 15% theoretically, a 10 or 15% profit margin, but a 100% downside.
You've just changed my mind. I'm retiring from being a professional concert promoter.
I thought the podcast was your business.
That's going to have to make it for us now.
Oh, man. All right. Well, maybe I can be a professional podcast guest.
That'd be great. We both got a new biz.
So, I don't know if we're getting too far ahead, but the dynamics between the parties in the concert business, the artist, the agent, the promoter, the building, the merchandiser, the concessionaire, just fascinates me.
Okay, so the relationship back and forth, and this is a great place to feature, because if you talk about the biggest change in management and evolving into tour promoting was how Michael Cole got his relationships with the acts starting through the merch world.
That's true.
So that concept of where those revenues are and the interaction between the act and just the cohesiveness led to the biggest tour deals in the world.
Right. And, you're talking about Michael Cole and Arthur Fogel, right? So what's in common?
They've both done very well off of the Rolling Stones and Madonna.
They're Canadian.
As is almost everyone else in the business.
It's unbelievable. How did that happen?
They're very nice people.
Yeah, they are. They're great.
I find it interesting, though, that their dollar's not worth what it used to be worth. That there was a point where their money was 1.1 to R1, right, and now the exchange rate's about 1.35, give or take at any moment. But so I find less shows playing Canada, and them routing them there less because they're just hitting the major markets because the dollar isn't worth what it was.
Right.
And I also find it very interesting that all those guys live down here in the U.S. now. Also interesting that AEG
I don't see anybody moving back.
Yeah, you don't see that. And AEG doesn't really do much in Canada. They've left the whole thing to Live Nation. So you find that the Live Nation guys bought the Union company, so that took the big independent out. Now Eventco is running the arena in Montreal. In the Maritimes, you got Louis Thomas at Sonic. But for the most part, it's consolidated, and you don't see AEG does the tours through there, but you don't see a lot of it. Elliot will pop in with some Golden Voice shows from now and then.
Yeah, but he lives in L.A.
Yeah, I found that they like the heat. It's really cold up there in Canada. And they got a hockey team. Anschutz was nice enough to get them a hockey team a block and a half away from their office. It's very convenient to be Canadian.
I guess that's true.
All you have to do is have all the money in the world one of these days. So, yeah, they all come down. They're all Canadian. Does that give them an advantage?
Listen, I don't know. I interviewed Michael Cole. We did a one-on-one at a conference. So I got the job of interviewing him. And I said, what is it about? Is this Canadian mafia? Where'd you guys come from? But you know what? They were the smartest guys in the business. And the way they got the Rolling Stones, the backstory to that, it's just incredible.
Through the merch table.
Well, that was true. And there's a famous story that Arthur tells about being at the promoters meeting, I assume probably around the CIC conference.
Before this, though, right? This is back with the original one when they're talking about the national touring stuff?
Yeah.
So this would be before the first CIC. Because all the promoters came together in one room to beat up on Graham to get him to not come into their markets because he started to do this national tour and promoter stuff?
Yeah.
This is the legendary promoter meeting, right?
Yeah. That's the one Arthur talks about.
Mid to early 80s, I'm guessing, give or take?
I'm assuming mid-80s, yeah. 85 maybe?
I know Barry was still doing a lot of regional stuff, Texas and Omaha, and obviously Colorado and Hawaii and Vegas, but there really was less of it. But Bill was able to start doing it because he was booking both coasts in the 70s, early 70s, late 60s, with both Fillmores.
And Arthur and Michael figured out a better way and changed the industry forever until Bob Sillerman got involved.
Well, and they all wound up on the same team one way or another, and now that company is spun off through as many different divisions as it has a Canadian running it.
That's true.
And many other great Canadians on top of it as well, and they're still running the industry, and I think Jay Marciano might be the only guy running a big major company that isn't Canadian on our industry.
Except he spent a long time in Toronto.
So he opened the amphitheater at Molson, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it always comes back to Canada.
It always comes back to Canada. So how did we get all the way into Jay Marciano? And
we took a left in Cleveland.
Oh, man. Jesus.
Let's get back on track. Okay. We can talk about those guys later. But
all right.
Let's talk about your different steps. Obviously, you were in a road manager position. You were doing the tour accounting. You were settling. And you're known for some of this stuff. We were talking about counting the seats, actually making sure the audit matched with how many seats, and seeing as a normal trend that there would often be a lot of seats in the venue that weren't on the audit.
Well, in the old days, we double-checked everything. I counted seats. I still have on, if you see a rider coming from a band that in the ticketing section says that you need to provide an X map at load-in, I probably wrote that part of the rider.
That's amazing. So if you're not truly understanding, he's not physically saying he counts the seats by, there's 20 there, there's 20 there. He goes through and hand counts the seats. And in an arena or a stadium, you'd have a staff to help you with this. But you'd go through and literally check off that every seat that's on there is on there, and that every seat that's in the venue is represented on your audit.
For the most part, there were shortcuts, but for the most part, yes, I did.
Okay. And then we were talking before we started that you also would weigh tickets on a scale.
I would.
Now, how did that work?
So it kind of morphs into a Lollapalooza story, right? So after the first Lollapalooza in 1991, the tour, not the Chicago Festival,
which you were part of, and Geiger and
Muller and Perry and Ted Gardner. I went to a fairs conference, Western Fairs conference in Palm Springs, and I'm just walking around looking at what they're selling in the in the trade show, and somebody was selling a scale for Carnival script. So if you had roll tickets, and it's 4 roll tickets gets you a ride or a beer, whatever it is, at the end of the night, you'd have to have people counting these little roll tickets. And, the labor was ridiculous.
So weighing them would just be easier.
Weighing them would be easier. Now, if they're off by a few tickets, it didn't matter.
Because you're saving that much time and it's worth it.
Exactly. And I thought, oh man, I need to buy one of these. I don't know what for, but what it was essentially is a parts counting scale.
And a ticket is a ticket.
And you would take a certain number of parts, whether they were ticket stubs or roll tickets or batteries or whatever, and you would put 50 of them in a bucket or a bin, and you'd set it on top of the scale, and you'd press the tab that said tare, T-A-R-E, and it would set it to 0. And it knew exactly what one part weighed. And so we would take big shopping bags of the drop, which are the ticket stubs from hard tickets.
This is when you went through the door before they scanned tickets. They would tear the end of the ticket off and they'd put it in the box. They would collect those.
Right.
And that would become the drop count.
Right. And still an important term in contracts. Right. And we would just dump the drop into these bins, put it on top of the scale. Scale would tell us how many tickets were in there. We'd write it down, dump it out, get another bag. We could do 30,000 tickets in half an hour.
So a stadium show essentially.
Well, we were doing big outdoor shows on Lollapalooza.
Sheds.
And some were sheds and some were fields. We did, I think, maybe the first Randall's Island concert.
Amazing.
Right?
So you're rolling into these places, building them in that morning and rolling out that night.
Well, Lollapalooza was pretty special because we did one-nighters. It was a multi-stage festival. We carried all of our own food and beverage and craft vendors. And we opened doors at noon, and the last band went off stage at 11 p.m. And then we moved at 350 miles. How insane is that?
Started everything from Horde Tour to Warped. Wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Palooza. You guys were the model.
We were the model. Well, we were the model for radio shows, too. Because once radio stations figured out that you could go into a market and put 7 or 8 bands on stage over the course of the day, well, they did it also.
And Sheds just loved the idea of having people there all day long when the F&B was through the roof.
It was through the roof.
There's really no winner here. The fans got a value with the ticket price. The venue's got ticket sales, and they got their popcorn and F&B through the door and their merch sales. The bands got to play to bigger crowds, and you guys got to produce the whole thing and make a producer fee.
Yeah. So anyway, we bought this for Lollapalooza, which I ended up also using on Metallica, because we would go into Europe, which was, 10 years ago, still the bad old days in some markets.
Because their technology hasn't caught up everywhere.
And we would just protect the drop. I'd hire people at each entrance to make sure.
You're literally watching it as if somebody was clicking.
Make sure nobody stole the tickets. And then we'd bring the bags into the office with the promoter there, so nobody could accuse us of anything. And we'd say, let's weigh it. And we'd do this in South America. We would do this in Europe. We'd do it wherever it was general admission.
Now, in America, in this day and age, the promoters, the agents, the managers have a pretty good relationship, especially the ones that do a lot of business.
Right.
There's a trust among thieves.
Right. And this is no longer an issue in the United States.
Right. So when I send you an audit, you're not worrying there's another 200 tickets hidden in there most likely.
That you have, a different event code? No, I'm not.
You're worried internationally, though, because it's not the same business. So it's still, and some of the other countries have, obviously, a lot of Europe has come online with that technology. And
exactly.
And there are reputable promoters in Australia and England.
Of course.
But
Absolutely.
There are certainly third world countries that are still doing massive shows that it's the wild, wild west.
It can be. And so, I still have the scale.
Seems like it might be something you'd use if you did a show in maybe Tijuana or something still.
Oh, please,
some
God,
of those
don't say
rings
that.
They exist.
But yes, so, that was how we figured out how many people were there. And there was a show we did in Russia where
it's not exact science, but it'd be close enough that you know if they were lying.
It's enough to give you a trend.
So you could figure out how close the actual numbers they were showing you were.
Right,
if they were
because
on or
if initially people would click, right?
Which isn't exact science either by any means.
And so for people who don't know what clicking is, there was a little hand counter, a thumb counter And as a person walked in the door, you pressed the button down and the numbers went up. And you'd have to have a person by each door. The problem is it's arguable.
Absolutely.
Right? I say, I collect 18,000 people. And the promoter says, well, yeah, but we sold 12,000 tickets, so your click is wrong. I have no backup. When I have the drop, I have backup.
By the way, when we did clubs, we clicked every night. And when we divide the money back by the ticket price, never matched. It was always off by a couple. Always. It's never an exact science. So even when you're clicking yourself, you still never come up exactly right.
It's not supposed to be exact.
The true math when you're doing a GA show is dividing back by the ticket price to figure out how many people in the room.
You're looking for a trend.
Right. But it gives you a good idea. So when the fire marshal shows up, you can show them where you're at.
Fair enough.
But at the end of the day, it's figuring out how to keep everybody honest.
So apparently, after I got this ticket scale, the Stones got wind of it. The Stones, not Mick and Keith, but
Fred and Barney.
Yeah, those Stones. The Stones accounting team. And they went out and bought it, and the Eagles team went out and bought it. Apparently, it was a thing for a while.
The Ross scale.
Man, I should have marketed it. I could have sold 3, maybe 4.
That's when the unions per heads that really get up there. The units at 4. That's where you really make your money. Okay, so everybody's doing the counting the way you are. You move into management, though, too. It's like you go from that tour production to the settling to the soundboard. Now you're in management.
I'm in management now. I'd always...
And you got 2 clients?
Amy LaVere, Memphis-based singer-songwriter, and Puddle's Pity Party.
And Waits is never a management client, ever. I've worked with Tom for 30 years. I book the tours. I produce the tours. But Tom has always been self-managed. Okay.
Always, since the mid-'80s.
So you're an agent producer in that role?
I'm part of the team.
Okay. And you still are, of course.
Still are.
If he should ever work again.
If he ever works again. And we hope he does.
But no plans as of right
now. Because he's the greatest live performer in the world.
I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that.
No.
Okay, so you've got clients on the management side. You've got an amazing relationship with Tom Waits that let's just call producing role. You've got still your production side of things where you'll get a call to, we were talking about going to do the production on football games at NASCAR tracks. You get called for the craziest of things.
Well, I work with Corn Capshaw at Red Light, and I have for over 4 years now.
Over how many years?
4, I think. Yeah.
But you've known for many decades, I'm sure, right?
No, actually, Corn's kind of a new person in my life.
Okay.
I was over at AEG. I was the COO of the festival division when Coachella was still struggling a bit. So I helped them out. We rebuilt certain processes.
So you work with Skip and Paul directly on that?
Skip and Paul directly. And once we achieved that goal, Corn called me and said, hey, come on over. I want to talk. So I've been working with Corn and Bruce Eskowitz and a bunch of the people there. And, great, interesting things come into Red Light's, onto Red Light's desks. And every once in a while, I get to collaborate on it. And, he'll invest in festivals. And to the extent that those festivals need some adult supervision, sometimes I get brought in.
Okay. And for those of you that don't know the name Corn Capshaw, Dave Matthews, Fish, Dierks Bentley, the names go on and on of who he's been involved with, but considered one of the biggest managers in the industry and actually owns a management company that has hundreds of managers now in all over the country and the world.
But if you don't know the name Corn Capshaw, you're probably listening to the wrong podcast. You need to go to maybe Gilbert Gottfried's podcast.
There are people trying to learn the business. Let's not be snobs.
Well, it's an astonishing company.
They've done great things.
They've done great things. And so one of my clients there is a 7-foot-tall clown.
Puddle's Pity Party.
Right.
We've had the opportunity to promote Puddles for Portland, Oregon for the last 4 or 5 years.
He's the best.
He certainly has a Bonneville kind of vibe to it where it's not a standard show. And he seems to shock the audience that hasn't seen him every time he opens his mouth.
It's variety entertainment, which I just love. they're such amazing performers. And, between magicians, jugglers, comics, there's such an incredible depth of skill of these guys. Anyway, I was lucky enough to be able to work with Puddle's Pity Party, and it's impossible to describe him. There's 30-some million views on YouTube, but that doesn't really tell the story, because he's a 7-foot-tall, white-faced, sad clown who has the singing voice Tom Jones wishes he had.
But he doesn't speak otherwise.
No,
but he's not singing, he doesn't
He's a
speak.
mime. And the shows are just kind of a cross between hysterical and joyful. They're incredible.
What do you do with him? You just picked him up recently. What's the plan? How do you take him from selling out clubs, which you're already doing, and he was when you came on board? What's the traction when in a variety act like that to take him to another level?
We'd like to get a residency. We're going to kind of look at Vegas for a residency.
That seems like that could be cool.
Yeah, that could be cool. We're looking at other media opportunities, maybe developing a TV show around him.
That seems very like something like Netflix. Seems like that could make a whole lot of sense.
So, we're looking forward to, some pretty cool things. And it's such an interesting performer that I think it's going to be great.
Be interesting to see the TV because he'd actually have to speak in character.
Maybe.
Or be like a musical. He only speaks in song.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, we kick around a lot of ideas because obviously the no speaking part means we got to get creative.
So now that you're managing full time basically now.
Yep.
Are you actively searching out more acts or the two have you a full plate for you?
No, we look at things. Luckily at Red Light, it's pretty collaborative. So several of us could work on one act because people have different skill sets. A lot of managers now have come into the business from the record company and radio side as opposed to the live side. So it's interesting that the skill sets all hopefully complement each other. It's kind of cool.
I find it interesting that everybody who was in all those cool plus positions in the different side of the industry have all found their way to the live side of it one way or another, as it's the only side that continues to financially support the business.
Make money. Yeah, it's true.
It's a snobby thing when I first got in the business 25 years ago. The record label guys were the guys. They controlled all the money. They were the ones that could buy the cool lunches, and they had the cool cars, and they had the future. And all of the guys that I knew with those jobs are all at amazing other companies doing other things now.
Right.
I think it's like I love bumping into Vince Bannon, old friend. Used to have a great plus job in the industry, and went from a bunch of different places since he left when the record labels fell. Getty he did great with. Now he's off doing his own thing. But I've noticed him being the tread setter there, where it was like as soon as he was out the door, it started watching that. He was like, "Watch, it's coming."
Well, listen, Vince at Getty was just what a great combination.
It's definitely the face of the company as far as the industry was concerned.
I know it was great, and we've all known Vince forever. When he was a promoter in Detroit.
I sometimes forget that he was there with Perry, but yeah, it was Vince started on that side of the business and certainly knows the ins and outs of it because of it. And he's, born salesman.
I think they just remodeled that club, St. Andrews.
Oh, in Detroit?
Yeah. I don't know exactly what the plans are, but I think they just remodeled it.
One of the scariest venues in America. If you leave the back door open, security will pull you in and tell you not to do it because you could get stabbed. This happens. Security gets mad at you because they're worried about your safety because it's not good if another person gets stabbed at the venue.
Yeah, they have actually a quota on stabbings, and once they exceed that quota, then they bring you in.
The sign in the line in the staff room. It's been so many days since a stabbing at the club. It's a legendary club. 8 Mile does a bunch of their stuff in the Shelter, which is the downstairs venue that's connected to it. So legendary names like Eminem connected to it. But Vince Bannon, it's an interesting thing, but he was the first one out the door. He said, wait, and all the other guys have followed suit. They're either managers now or agents or real estate tycoons, but they've all those label guys.
Who's a real estate tycoon?
Some of the guys that were in Aspen, I want to say it's Rob, but it's not. I'm spacing. One of those guys turned into being a real estate guy in the mountains and has done very well for himself.
Nice.
So, yeah.
I'm expecting that more executives in the business will go into the cannabis industry now that California is about to pass that law.
Yeah, imagine actually by the time this runs, we should know that California, Nevada, Arizona all went, as well as Massachusetts.
Yep.
And paying very close attention to that is, we might have a little investment in that world myself.
Good.
But yeah, I think you're right. It's the future. Jim Louie has been talking about it quite a bit too. So you've got all of these different sides. You tour managed Weezer up until just very recently, right?
Yep, 15 years.
And those guys were basically doing weekends, one-offs, and short runs, right?
They were doing weekends, which was fine. But when they decided to do a long tour, I no longer had the bandwidth to do it, and so it's like best of luck. I love those guys.
But you guys were together for years.
15.
It's one of those things. You're jumping from hat to hat to hat.
I was, Weezer 15 years, Tom Waits 30 years.
But they ran congruently.
Yeah, they didn't bump up against each other because I have great clients that don't work. It's like a great resume, but
you've not been fired. These are acts that you were with and you could stay with, and you'd still be with Weezer if you wanted to be on the road more, but they're working more now, right?
And I have another full-time job.
Managing is a full-time job, I hear.
Yep.
I was always under the impression that's just when you tell promoters you want more money and then you go back to hanging out at the Sunset Marquee.
No, that's an agent.
Oh, my mistake. I apologize.
Sorry. Jesus Christ.
So, Performance Magazine awarded you twice. Is it Tour Manager of the Year? Polestar did it as well. Is that correct?
No, wait a minute. It's more than twice.
Oh, excuse me.
But I don't remember how many times.
But both Performance Magazine, you got to go back a ways. They've been bankrupt for more years than I can remember. Yeah, but they were the gold standard for a moment, and then Polestar overtook them.
Performance was before Polestar.
There was some overlap, though.
Right, and then Polestar came in and actually set themselves aside in the marketplace by being accurate. Because
wasn't enough to report it, you actually had to be right?
Performance was never accurate. They would put pictures, blurry pictures that were taken with an Instamatic camera and have the wrong names on it. And they would publish a directory. I mean, you didn't go online. There was no online. There was a directory. And if you wanted to look up, a phone number of an agent or a promoter or a building, you would go into the Performance directory. There were a couple others. Billboard had one. But the Performance directory, the phone numbers weren't even right.
We lived and died by those directories, and it was before Google. We needed them. And we traveled with them. We had to have them.
And, it's just that I guess while running Performance Magazine, you didn't have fact checkers.
Well, it was pretty unique data.
It was, yeah. So
they used to actually print the route books too, which I loved because they were weekly. Now they have websites. You can go. You don't have to do that anymore. Polestar discontinued that a couple of years ago with the routing. But you used to go in and see where all the bands were routing, and I guess it made sense that they killed it because nobody ever looked at the routing for all the different bands.
And I don't know how accurate some of it was because the client actually has to feed the information. Somebody has to feed the information to the magazine. But Performance used to have a great conference, and it was the conference that everybody went to.
It was connected with a big golfing outing, right?
There's always kind of a golf element to it. But they had a big conference before Polestar had their conference. And Performance was unlike any magazine that exists now, which they did production, agency, building, promoter, manager. So kind of everybody was included. So
the managers would actually hang out with low-life promoters, huh?
It was fun.
Because back at that time, there really was a line between promoters weren't supposed to talk to the managers. It was taboo. You talked to the agent, and you went around him, you got in trouble.
You're not supposed to.
But it was a bigger thing back then. It was like to have a relationship with the manager is not the end of the world anymore.
Right. But, they had a great conference. And, the magazine went out of business. I assume they just had other business issues. And the whole thing folded. And but, yeah, they gave out awards. And I got an award a few times.
And then Polestar as well has named you Tour Manager of the Year.
Or Tour Accountant or something, yeah.
Those are big to-dos from your industry peers saying you're the best at something many times over.
I know. It was great.
Of all the other things. Let's digress.
But you know what? All those awards, a lot of them came from during the 7-year Lollapalooza tour run. And we were kind of out in front of everything. We were inventing new ways of touring and producing and promoting as we went along. And so...
Plus, you were making everybody money. You were seeing everybody, and you were making them money, and you were there constantly. It was a yearly thing.
And, we changed the industry. I really honestly believe that we changed the industry. And that the festival business now is directly a result of the work we did on Lollapalooza.
There's no question, and I think everyone knows the name Lollapalooza, which is something that you can't take for granted. That's the state-of-the-art name. Coachella may be the biggest festival in America at this point, but everyone knows what Lollapalooza is. My parents know what it is, and that's to say that they might not know Coachella, but they definitely know what Lollapalooza is.
Yeah, it's just the idea of a touring festival outside of what Kevin Lyman is doing just doesn't exist anymore.
It's hard to have that many acts on the road and pull it up at the beginning of the day, move on to the next city, and have it gone the next.
It's just not financially feasible. One of the things that people don't remember about Lollapalooza, there were no sponsors.
Actually did not know that.
Zero.
It was pointed out to me recently how few bands were on the two stages. And when I say few, it's a long day of music, but it was under, 20? It was right around that?
Probably 7 on the main stage. I don't remember what the second stage did, and towards the end we had a third stage.
And that was really small emerging bands on the third stage, right?
Yeah, there was a guy named John Rubely who booked the second and third stages.
There was some cool stuff on the second and third stages. I think Coolio was there one year.
That's true.
It's really different stuff. It's not white kids in middle America didn't get a chance to see Coolio in his heyday unless Lollapalooza made that possible. I wouldn't have ever been allowed to go see Ice Cube either.
Tool was on the second stage.
They must have had a cut down production back in those days, huh?
It was a different production.
But some of the bands they picked early on were amazing. It was Soundgarden was up there the year that the Red Hot Chili Peppers closed, but early in the day was this band called Pearl Jam.
That's true. Now, the Pearl Jam story, which you should probably get Don Muller to come in and talk about, is Don, who was their agent, booked them for Lollapalooza before their first album came out.
Really? I would think
he just knew because he's Don Muller.
Now, this comes less than 12 hours after Eddie Vedder sang during the World Series at Wrigley Field last night, Take Me Out to the Ballpark in 7-inning stretch. So the timing on this is amazing.
So, they played second out of 7.
And they had just come off the Red Hot Chili Peppers tour with Smashing Pumpkins, excuse me.
And they were huge. And the problem is this was 92, the crowds were bigger than we really even anticipated.
Because grunge had blown up between the time you announced the tour and played it.
And we didn't necessarily have all of our most efficient systems in place to getting people in. This is before ticket scanning.
But they were still doing the tours. You were weighing tickets.
We were tearing the tickets and, looking in backpacks. And Pearl Jam was on somewhere, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And you have thousands of people waiting in line to get in. And they hear Pearl Jam starting on the main stage. And we had some very serious crowd control problems that we had to fix very quickly.
On the fly.
And
we're talking about young kids, alcohol.
Because they wanted...
probably early days with drugs for a lot of these kids, too.
Look, they wanted to tear down the fences. We didn't, we were in fields a lot of the time.
You didn't want this to turn into Woodstock 1.
Exactly. And, so we had an issue because they were really popular and so was the show and they were on early. But we fixed it.
And then you get people in early, too, because they're there all day then.
We had Green Day opening.
This is, 94?
It was whatever year they hit.
With Dookie, yeah.
With Dookie, which was after us. But they opened one year. So, yeah, listen, the stuff we did on Lollapalooza was groundbreaking.
It's amazing, especially taking into the middle America, some of these gangster rappers. Ice-T and Ice Cube both performed on it in their own years. And things like Ministry, who played in during the daylight, Because the light show couldn't work yet.
That was a charming bunch.
Was it?
No. Al Jorgensen was a challenge.
I would imagine bands like Jesus and the Mary Chain that aren't used to playing outside of clubs, having to play in the middle of the afternoon, there's a challenge to get them used to that.
They made up Lollapalooza suck shirts. Nick Cave.
Creature of the Night.
4 p.m. slot. And, when you're playing amphitheaters, the lawn will fill up before the pavilion will fill up. Because if you're on the lawn, you're grabbing your spot.
Right.
If you're in the pavilion, you can come and go as you wish. And, Nick Cave coming on stage at 4 o'clock during daylight with a quarter-filled pavilion, it was not a happy time.
It's got to be a learning curve for those acts to begin with, trying to figure out why they're there when they're used to playing sold-out clubs to ballrooms.
I'm not sure what the conversations were between the acts and their agents when they were playing during the daylight, but they expected to be performing at night. But there were some times that I hope I forget.
I think there's a lot of these acts, though, that actually wound up making the best of it. Bands like Violent Femmes certainly learned how to do radio shows, play early in the afternoon, and figure out that they could play twice that day. I think George Clinton figured that out, too, that if he played in the afternoon, he'd go play that night somewhere, too, and he'd get paid twice for the same day.
So George Clinton had always been known as a guy whose sets went on and on forever.
Because the P-Funk party don't stop.
It don't stop. And the problem with Lollapalooza is we had to end at 11.
Dark curfews.
Well, it wasn't even the curfew as
sound.
much as the fact as we got to pack all this shit up, put it into trucks, and drive at 350 miles and start another show at noon. So for us, the curfew was not a union bill curfew, and it, for the most part, wasn't an audio curfew. It was
just sheer.
It was a
volume
logistical
of miles,
curfew. And so...
Because there were days where you'd have day, especially on the weekends, right? Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you guys would work.
A different city every day. We rarely did 2 in a city. And so George...
And not a lot of off nights, too, right? Some weeknights off nights, but not a ton.
Probably Mondays and Thursdays or something.
But you guys were working on Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
Yeah, oh, yes. And...
it's the only way it would work financially.
We were concerned about George Clinton because we couldn't have a never-ending set.
Right.
But, we let them know early on that it was a 50-minute set, not 51, and we hoped for the best. And you know what? It was 50 minutes exactly every night. They were the best. George had this enormous band. He had 2 bass players. He had 2 bass players. Who has 2 bass players?
P-Funk.
And I said to him one day, I said, Mr. Clinton, why do you have 2 bass players? He said, well, if something happens to one of them, I have a spare. And one night...
It sounds like a joke, but I think there's a realistic issue with this.
One day, I'm at a show, and it's in mid-afternoon, and I see an ambulance pull up backstage. And... they do some stuff. I was doing something else, so I didn't go over and look. And then the ambulance goes away, and I said, hey, what happened over there? They said, George Clinton's bass player passed out from sunstroke, and they took him away. And it was unbelievable. George was right.
He had a backup.
It's
just like the military. 2 is 1, 1 is none.
Most people carry backup guitars or backup amplifiers. George Clinton had a backup bass player. It was the best thing.
The show goes on.
It was unbelievable.
The tour survived a lot of things. Nirvana was supposed to headline that year, I believe.
That's true.
Sonic Youth stepped in. The tour went on.
Yeah. I think that was 95.
Sounds right.
Okay. So the tour that year was supposed to be...
was Beastie Boys?
Nirvana, Beastie Boys, Smashing Pumpkins, right? Nirvana goes away in the spring. So it's Beastie Boys, Smashing Pumpkins. And we really got criticized for that tour.
couldn't see the biggest band in alternative rock history lead singer committing suicide.
The press criticism was interesting. They said Lollapalooza is not about having platinum selling artists. It's about giving an opportunity to bands who would never be able to play in front of big crowds. That it shouldn't be about Smashing Pumpkins and the Beastie Boys. They're huge bands. It should be about Hole and Pavement and Sonic Youth,
who were still there.
That was the following year.
So maybe you guys followed the intentions of the criticism?
So whatever happened, the tour was never booked based on what the press said.
I assume it was based on what Perry wanted and Don and Geiger.
That's exactly right. So the following year, we had a really alternative bill, and we had Pavement and Sonic Youth and Hole. And the same press said Lollapalooza's a ripoff, there's no headliner. We couldn't win.
Well, as long as the fans were happy. I mean, you got to see the Beastie Boys play with George Clinton.
That's right.
Made my year.
Yep.
And then Sonic Youth closed. What a great show.
And we had, a second stage, a third stage in New York where Patti Smith did her first performance in 16 years or something.
I mean, I got to see Rage Against the Machine with 17 other people in the pit.
Nice.
Because Lollapalooza made that possible.
Right. And you didn't see the Philadelphia show where Rage came on stage naked.
No, I didn't see that.
With PMRC written across their chests, one letter on each guy in black gaffer tape. They walked up on stage naked, took a guitar, turned the volume up, put it against the amplifier so it would feed back, and they just stood there for 10 minutes. Now,
trying to make a point, huh?
Well, PMRC, which we probably should explain, was a governmental organization that wanted to censor lyrics. And it was Tipper Gore, Al's wife at the time. Yeah. And
I'm sure Zach didn't take kindly to that, so that explains a lot.
And so, they stood on stage naked, didn't play a song, and 10 minutes later walked off.
And then probably followed by Arrested Development, who played a great show, I imagine.
I don't remember who followed them. It was an interesting day.
So we were just talking about some of the other guys that are coming up behind you. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of them, but I think one of my favorites is Jim Runge.
We love Jim Runge.
He's just recently talked about how he looks up to you and thinks about when he's in a scenario, what would Stuart do?
Sounds crazy, but I think it's great.
And for those of you to know, he's known for the Black Keys, and he's out with Major Lazer right now, and he's going out with Empire of the Sun, and he just jumps back and forth between major tour after major tour.
Yep.
But this next generation of production managers, who's out there that you really respect and like?
Oh, man. Jim Runge and Gus Brandt are two of my favorites.
Gus is Foo Fighters, right?
Gus is Foo Fighters.
Well known. Both these guys have won Tour Promoter of the Year the last couple of years. Actually.
They're great guys and totally get it. But to be honest with you, I'm concerned about people coming up in the industry understanding even the basics about what we do. I'm a guy who will take a phone call from anybody, and I will go and teach classes or speak at classes at any music business university. The problem is there seems to be a disconnect, I'll say in 2016, but it's been going on for a number of years, about what it is that tour managers do, that production managers do, why somebody would want to be in the business and stay in the business. And I have this conversation a lot with people. Young people come in, say, I'd like to be a tour manager. I said, why? Well, I love music. Okay, well, that isn't a reason to be a tour manager. I love music too, but
it's a reason to buy a ticket to see a show.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the client that I'm going to work with is the music that I listen to. And even if I did, the chances of me seeing that music on a nightly basis are small. Because as anybody who's probably listening to this knows, for the most part, we're stuck in a windowless office, 2 floors under the stage. trying to, return phone calls, emails, and type numbers into spreadsheets.
And just to put you in the right headspace, that stale beer smell is always there too.
Well, yes, there's a good part to it, yes. But, the guys that get it, the guys and women who get it are a small percentage. I mean, I tell people, they say, well, how should I get in the business? And I think the answer they want is, you know what? I know a band who could use you. And instead, I say, go to work at a box office. Any box office. It doesn't matter. Not a movie theater, but any box office where you can learn the Ticketmaster system. And they said, well, why?
Learn to read an audit.
I said, because half of what we do is verifying income. The other half is verifying expenses. I said, the income part is so complicated that if somebody were trained in it, that makes them smarter than the next person who's vying for that job. I say, if you want to be a tour manager, go to work at a travel agency for 2 years. Because a lot of what we do is arrange travel. If you know how to work the airline system and the hotel system better than the other guy who just happens to be organized, you win. And I said, banks. Work at a bank. Be a bank teller. Let me know that you're comfortable handling large sums of money and it won't freak you out. And that you can do simple spreadsheets. Just have a skill set that sets you apart from people who just want the job. Be somebody who's smart enough to actually do the job. Doesn't mean that you'll have the right temperament or personality, because obviously dealing with entertainers and in a situation where you're away from home for months and months and traveling on a bus, doesn't work for a lot of people. But I tell people this and they're like, I'm leaving. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Because I'm afraid that people just don't want to develop the skills.
Well, it's a new generation thing where people don't talk as much. They certainly don't interact as much. And it's about the email or the text. It's not about the phone call or the in-person meeting.
I understand that. But we are, and always have been, a dynamically driven business. And we're a relationships business. And if you can't develop the relationships, I don't know, how you can be successful in this business.
Well, a lot of people aren't. It's a come and go thing. The border to entry have never been easy for this business.
No, but, you can, I'm not saying you could game the system, but you can make it move in the direction you need it to just by being the smartest guy in the room.
Well, there's no question that you are certainly the smartest guy in this room.
I don't know about that.
I want to thank you for taking the time and being a Promoter 101 today. It's always an honor to talk to you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
This was good.
Yeah. Next week, I believe we have the Dave Hart interview for you that we promised you the last couple weeks. Sooner or later, we'll actually play that for you. 6 and 1 and pick 'em if that's next week, but my gut is we do. Luke?
Yeah, we'll see. Dan's going to be speaking again at Aspen Live this December 8th as a part of the Fireside Chat with AEG Live's Jay Marciano.
Really excited to talk to Jay. And hey, we'll be doing Promoter 101 as a live recording at Polestar Live coming up the first weekend of February. Really excited about having a studio audience for our first time ever. And we've got a very special guest lined up for that one, Luke, but let's just keep it as a surprise for now, huh?
Sure. If you enjoyed us today, you can follow us on Twitter. I'm W. Luke Pierce, and Dan is the Jew.
I want to thank everyone for listening. I just thought it'd be my dad, but from the massive response we've had online, it seems like there's a couple of you out there, and we want to thank all of you for it.
Make sure you subscribe to our mailing list at promoter101.com and subscribe to Promoter 101 wherever you listen to podcasts.
Email us anything at steiny@promoter101.net. Questions, thoughts, concerns. Is your wife pregnant, and how do you deal with that? Why would you possibly ask us that question? Any of those things. We're here for you. Luke?
I got nothing. Thanks for tuning in this week.
It's been a great Promoter 101. Bye, y'all.
Cheers.